My name is Camden Hilliard from Mililani, Hawaii. I write because I need to tell the truth. This week at YoungArts, I learned I need to sleep more.
November 18th, 2010. Continue to work out your salvation with fear and trembling. Philippians 2:12. For weeks now, Jack has been bouncing my questions back like pogo sticks with flubber on the rubber bouncy part. I want to show him what a promise sounds like. I tell him about myself, waiting for a response, but he's gotten so good at deflecting, I can hardly tell what language he speaks anymore. I have a book on my shelf called God Never Blinks, and I'm wondering if I can sue for false advertising. In fact, why stop there? Why not take the whole religious phenomenon to court? Jehovah, Job, Jesus, Judas, all of them. I want to start my own religion. I want to pray to silence because if something so pure and unadulterated and simple can exist, maybe there's a hope for all of us. There's a book on my desk called Surviving Schizophrenia. It is the most honest title I have ever read because there is no beating schizophrenia. There is only holding tight, biting your lower lip till you taste blood. January 3rd, 2011. James Wright crafts a poem of delicious language and imagery that makes me feel like a sticky 8-year-old kid, too old for tag, but just young enough not to care. Wright ends the poem with the line, "I've wasted my life." Sometimes it's just easier not to finish things. Year of the Four Horsemen. It may sound silly, but I cherish quiet. I hunt for it like early cavemen throwing dull spears of initiative, trying to peck down a few syllables of sound. It's tricky though. Silence is a tough mistress. She likes to play hard to get in the darkness of alleyways and corner drugstores and my restless hands. I like silence because most of the time I hear voices in my head. I do not like the voices in my head, and they do not like me. They make me say things I never mean. Right now, for example, the voices want me to leave the stage before I keep embarrassing myself. But I'm not going to listen. Sometimes I can gather courage like kindling for a small fire, because voices don't do well in the light. Sometimes I can make them disappear altogether, but that's sometimes. Most of the time I suffer. Slow, painful feelings associated with words like searing, like corroding. The voices are versatile. Sometimes they speak to me directly, which makes me uneasy. I have to remind myself that these voices are not real. Sometimes they speak to each other about me, kind of a running commentary in my head. Sometimes the voices are speaking to each other, not even including me in the conversation. And those are the easy times. When I can worry about pre-calculus problem sets. When I can write poems instead of the apologies which are too common. Times when I can feel status quo, content. But they don't last long.
Two stories. In the 30s, my grandmother was a girl and walked to her Idaho town limits, where heaps of surplus potatoes were beginning to decompose. She dug with bare hands for all she could salvage and carried them home in the makeshift basket of her burlap skirt. While in a book I read as a child, a girl sat cross-legged on her cellar floor, reached into a barrel of apples, and took only the first bite of each, until bitten galas and empires surrounded her like planetary orbs. No moral, but apple, everything for weeks. Credo with an epigraph by Joan Didion. When we mourn our losses, we also mourn, for better or for worse, ourselves. As we were, as we are no longer, as we will one day not be at all. From the Year of Magical Thinking. Kylie, let me tell you about Elvis, the hound dog, who walked on his ears at the end of my street. When he died at 13, a black lab puppy, his playmate, burst through the chain link fence and never returned. A mouse crawls into a hive and dies of starvation, so the bees embalm his body, even his whiskers preserved in resin. I know you've read Didion, and that's why you're saying human beings, the only animals aware of their mortality. But think of the gorilla at the Munster Zoo who clutched her lifeless infant to her chest for days. The elephants who recognized the skulls and tusks of their own and dropped to their knees. And Didion, unable to give away her husband's loafers because he might come back, might need them. Kylie, replace it with the only animals that build fires, clothe themselves, create art, allow their children to come back home. Or at least consider the Turritopsis, with torn tentacles reverting to pollen. My brother climbing over a guardrail and jumping from boulder to boulder until he swings his feet over the canyon edge.
Hi, I'm Stephanie Bronfine. I'm from Baltimore, Maryland, and I am a writer because it is what I am most passionate about.
Something I probably should have written in a letter. I know I don't have what you would call a job, sir. My skill set doesn't require a 9-to-5 necktie affair. Don't worry about how I get her all this stuff. It's legit and everything, on the up and up, you could say. She's 18. I don't know why you don't just let her do what she wants, even if she still lives under your roof. For now. She graduated high school and now she wants to be with me. Really be with me. Like, without all the other girls. She believes in me. She loves me, you know? Right, the screaming the other day. I don't see why it's any of your business, sir, but if you really want to know, we were on the phone. Sorry about that bill, sir. I hear you yelling at her sometimes for it, but we've got to keep the relationship alive, you know? You have a girlfriend. You must understand. Oh, wait, I heard what happened. I'm sorry about that, too. I guess you wouldn't really understand. Yes, again, the point. Well, we were on the phone, and I think she was maybe complaining about you. No offense. Something about your strange Guatemalan rules and standards and whatever else she was saying. I wasn't necessarily listening. Also, why did you name her Camille if you guys are all Guatemalan? That's not Guatemalan at all. Whenever I tell people that my girlfriend is Guatemalan and they already know her name, they laugh at me because they think I'm lying. Like, we all know that Guatemalans are seriously curvaceous, and her name does not do her body justice at all. Sorry. But she was talking and I wasn't really listening. Don't get mad. Remember, I'm laying it to you flat, and some girl or whoever was sending me all these text messages. I'll spare you those details. Cam heard all the clicking on my phone and started screaming at me, like really, really screeching. You know what I'm talking about. I've heard her yell at you like that. I couldn't understand her because she started talking in Spanish, and I hardly know English, but I could hear my name every few words, so I knew it was about me and not you, and that I was seriously fucked. Sorry for my language, sir. Won't happen again. I just didn't know what the fuck to do. So I hung up. It was the only way to make it stop. You do that too, don't you? To a certain extent? Okay, well, anyway, so I was laying on my bed and I ended up just turning off my phone. I wasn't even sending messages back to that girl. I was just laying on top of the covers, sneakers on and everything, thinking to myself, what do I do? First things first, I roll a joint. I didn't think that'd be so offensive to you, sir. Usually in Latino countries, well, you guys are pretty in touch with the herb, aren't you?
Hey, I'm Ryan Gillespie, and I'm from Birmingham, Alabama, and I write because it's how I explore the world and converse with it and basically make sense of it. November. I go shopping for guy jeans. I want the space in the crotch, the stiffer, darker colors, and then I want the tag that says I'm wearing guy jeans and that I'm not in girls' jeans, drag, anymore. I let my mom know I'm going to the mall and that I'm getting guy jeans. She makes a face. She tells me they won't fit, that my hips are too big. I send up a quick wish that she's wrong and drive down busy streets to get there. I end up standing in the mall's American Eagle, browsing the jeans. A clerk glances me over, but doesn't say anything. I go back to the dressing room with a pair, where a song I've heard somewhere before is playing softly. She said, I think I'm going to Boston. I think I'll start a new life. I think I'll start over, where no one knows my name. I hate dressing room music. I drop my own jeans and stare at myself briefly in the mirror. Wide hips, soft skin, thin leg hair. And I think briefly, who the hell would ever like me, call me boyfriend? I grip the belt loops and pull up, and before the pants are even on, I know they don't fit. And I know I'll look stupid, and I know they'll be too tight around the hips, just like Mom said. And they'll be too loose around the legs, too long, and I know the tears will come to my eyes like the pressure let them burst through. I know I'll hurry out and try to not cry in the car so the road doesn't blur. Try to not wreck, but then not care, because the jeans don't fit me, just like Mom said. But I go through the process anyway, because I was too sad to stop it, and Mr. Dysphoria was knocking too loudly on the dressing room door. My mom knows something is wrong when I get home and sit in her office, watching her screensaver blankly. Hannah, is this about the jeans? Don't call me that, not now. Yes. Why are you so upset? Can we please go up to my room? I climb the stairs, my nervousness making me buzz like a wire. When we're in my room and situated on my bed, I start talking. And honestly, I don't remember how I started. I can't remember if it started with the jeans. I can't remember if it started with the jeans, the past few months, the fact that I have stopped eating, the general anxiety, the desire to tell her. I do remember, however, the sound of my voice saying, I think sometimes I might not be a girl. And I remember the feeling of muscles crinkling up, face getting wet and salty and hot, as my mom pulls me into a scared hug, a hug I wasn't expecting, a hug I needed. She doesn't say anything. She doesn't know what to say. There is nothing she can say. She asks me if this is really why I need therapy, and I nod. She signs me up for a session that night. And I wonder if she thinks therapy will fix this problem that has confused her poor, sad daughter. Someone just needs to clear this up for me. It's just a phase. But it doesn't matter if she approves or disapproves or anything at all, because I go downstairs and have the biggest dinner I've had in months. The cold sweeps by outside.
Light. I like when it fights to exist, squeezes between the gap teeth of metallic blinds, falls onto bone-white tiles of a kitchen floor in pieces like shredded apple skin. I like when it drifts, trembles like flower petals during an earthquake, when it sleeps, blurred like memories squinting against sun, when it slips into the room, the moon dancing on soft curls. And I love when light floods through your mouth, fractures like porcelain, when it disappears with the afternoon mist, exhaled by a lover left behind. Rift. Last night, we drank the dirty milk sky like thirsty animals, watched the blinking lights of passing planes, our man-made constellations. I asked you if the passengers felt anything when people mistakenly made wishes on their own broken-back dreams. These words left my tongue, fluttering like one-winged butterflies. I thought they reached you, but next night found them tangled like kites in the branches of your lives. Sunday. When your mother sits in silence, lips pursed, eyes skimming the print of a tabloid magazine. When the waitress approaches and your mother's smile flickers, her eyes rimmed red, fingers navigating the mouth of a coffee cup. When you are divided by a table and forks and proper etiquette, and words cannot travel the inches between your lips. You know she digests nothing but thoughts of last night, when your father yelled and broke dishes, when your father realized he was worth nothing in America, that his value existed only in the land he left behind. The clank of forks sounds hollow, the tension static in the air, and your mother tucks her glasses behind her ears so she won't shatter like the glass that tumbled from your father's cold hands.
My name is Cameron Goodwin. I'm from Columbia, South Carolina, and the reason I started writing is because I like to challenge myself. I want to put myself in a box. I want to see how fast I can get out of it using the words I have in my mind and in my heart. Lying in bed next to her snoring husband, Mariah Harvey tries to remember her previous marriage, the family she left behind years ago. But all that comes to mind are the things she hated about it all. The constant dirtiness of the house, the shabby square of yard, the overall dreariness of the neighborhood. That wasn't the life she wanted, or rather, the preferred setting. Here, in the present, she likes her pool, her white picket fence, her neighbors who drink glasses of red wine for breakfast. She thinks she loves her husband and their house, though the childless quiet sometimes bothers her. She touches her stomach, follows the scar along the bottom of her belly. When pregnant with her daughter, everyone told her that the first child would hurt the most. She didn't believe them, not until the obstetricians surrounded her, scalpels and sutures hovering over her swollen womb like locusts. She cursed that child. She cursed her now ex-husband for planting it inside her. She shouldn't have. Her daughter, Mary, grew up a quiet child, diffident and unassuming, willing to fulfill any simple request. Whenever Mariah would attempt father-daughter, mother-daughter activities, brushing each other's hair, reading bedtime fairy tales, composing scrapbooks of glitter and paste, Mary acted as if she didn't want to be bothered. She jerked her hair away and brushed it herself, or took the book out of Mariah's hands and read it in silence. After a while, Mariah just stopped trying. Her attention returned to the small world that existed outside of her daughter, and eventually she made her decision. One night, she slipped out of bed and stood over her sleeping child. Mary was only 4. Mariah watched the rise and fall of Mary's shoulders, noted how her husband's jeans dominated the child's face, how much easier it would be for him to look at Mary and not be reminded of the wife who disappeared. She kissed her cheek, and without shedding a tear, she left.
Hi, I'm Nia Milner and I'm from Fayetteville, Georgia. The reason I became a writer is because I'm not good at anything else. And it's simple catharsis. I write what I know, I write what I want to know. At Young Arts Week, I cried my first tears of joy. Validation is defined in the dictionary as young arts. Thank you so much. You've given me the courage to actually accept myself as a writer.
Frank the painter is my date to my sister Martha's wedding. He is not the sensitive type. He will not buy you roses and call you beautiful. He will never write you a love poem. He is a painter, yes, but he paints houses, not pictures. He drinks beer, not light beer, and he never uses words with more than 3 syllables. He is a brute. He is an animal. He is a relief. Frank is my date to my sister Martha's 3rd wedding in 5 years. Of course, there is no judgment here, not for me anyway. Mother is a different story. At the reception, Mother sits with Frank and me. She sneers. These men have all looked exactly alike. It's like she's marrying the same man over and over again. Martha's tastes are so predictable. The band plays a waltz, and Martha scarfs down as much veal as he can fit in his mouth. I watch Mother. She keeps gazing at her hand, or rather, she keeps gazing at the new engagement ring on her hand. Mother and Martha are 2 of a kind. They change clothes as often as they change husbands. Martha is so fickle, Mother exclaims. She needs to pick one man and stick with him. To talk to his part used to mean something. I don't know what it is with your generation. Mother's ring is lovely. The reception hall is lovely. Martha's waltz is lovely. Frank never asked me to dance. He never holds my hand. He does let his fingers creep slyly up my short bridesmaid's dress. The dress is pink. It's gotten too small for me, too. I've worn it before, at each of Martha's other weddings. By the time Frank's fingers reach that scandalous place under my skirt, I've had too much champagne to care about propriety. I down another glass. Frank follows my lead. He takes 2 glasses from the waiter and knocks them back one right after another, like shots. He is my Prince Charming. Knowing full well that my mother is sitting 2 seats away, Frank kisses me, leading with his tongue. He tastes like sweat and sunshine, so I kiss him back. Mother is appalled. Frank asked me to get him some more champagne. He tells me he wants to find some place where we can be alone. We get up and find an empty coat closet. Frank follows me in and closes the door behind him, leaving us in the dark. He smiles. Even in the dim light, I can see his teeth are yellow. I don't care. Frank is simple. Frank knows what he wants. And as he leans in to kiss me, I'm more than happy to give it to him.
Hi, I'm Christina. I'm from Berkeley, California, and I write to express the things that I can't say out loud. I love Young Arts because I'm surrounded by 152 other kids whose dreams are coming true.
You took me to the lot where the Jenkinsons used to live. I stopped in front of that loose plank on the withering fence. I knew my mother would not stand to see me follow you. But you turned around, held that plank open for me, and told me it was safe, so I followed.
You led me through the tall grass and climbed through an empty window frame right into the garage. The cement had cracked so long ago that the floor was just dirt. The yellow paint looked like it was escaping from the walls, and all the remaining windows had holes the size of baseballs in them. You told me to stand in the middle of the room, and I did. You ripped open your box of salt and you poured it in a perfect circle around us. You never looked up, you didn't say a word, you didn't blink. You just poured that bitter dust onto the floor. I asked you what you were doing. You stepped into the ring and said, magic. Then you told me that nothing could touch us now. You promised me we were safe. You pulled out the radio that you always kept there. You cranked it up all the way and showed me how you were supposed to dance to Chuck Berry. You showed me that Coca-Cola tastes better with a spicy fireball in it. You showed me how to wear our jackets like the big kids. We'd play Johnny and June. You'd sing Johnny, and I'd have to sing Johnny too, because you said only June could be June. We spent every Saturday in the old Jenkins lot, every single one. I'd escape from my kitchen first thing after breakfast and get back after the streetlights came on. The garage floor was made of our footprints and layers of salt rings. We'd mostly dance and sing, but sometimes we'd buy a whole pack of bubble gum and see who could blow bigger bubbles until the sugar stuck to our faces. Once I asked you what you did every other day of the week, and you said, get ready for Saturday. Then you moved to fix the static of the radio. Your big kid shirt slipped open and I saw that scar on your chest and I gasped. You said, oh. You opened your shirt 2 buttons down to show me the rest of it. A perfect line as thick as my fingers dug from the top of your chest to right above your belly button. I shuddered. I asked you what happened. You shrugged. You told me you were born wrong. I asked you why, and you shrugged. They've been trying to fix me since I was a baby. So I put my ear to your chest. Yours was the first pulse I felt. And I said that you sounded fine. You smiled. That I'm cured. I unbuttoned the chest of my schoolgirl blouse and asked you if I was born right. You listened to me too. My muscles pounded through my skin. You felt the punch and you flinched. And you pulled back and you told me that I would live forever.
You were always clumsy, or rather, you were often told that you were, and after 9 years, you had grown into what people expected you to be. When you were learning how to walk, you had tripped frequently. There was a scar on your lip to prove it, from when your face had collided with a rake lying in the front yard. Some might have considered your injuries just a stage of growing, but Mother saw it as a sign of a klutz in the family. You were her first. She didn't know that the clumsiness was a natural side effect of your emerging coordination. It was how your muscles learned what was too far to the left, what was too far forward or back. Either way, you adopted the habits of the ungainly. Clumsy became Mother's descriptive word for you, the thing she apologized about, the word thrown around the house like a curse. Don't be so clumsy. Please try not to be clumsy. Mother never let you near the old vases that cracked so easily, leaf-filtered light dancing across their smooth surfaces like a pointless painting. She placed them up on the highest shelves possible, where we stored a few old photographs of relatives none of us could remember. They're antiques, dear, she'd say, watching our confused faces. We were never allowed to dust, but always allowed to sweep, with the hope that we would be unable to break the sturdy wooden floor beneath our feet. But our eyes would always find those vases, and we would become distracted, the broom hitting the cat walking lazily by, or solidly knocking against a table leg. We didn't understand how such an easily broken thing could be so valued. In our minds, the simple lines of the mason jars were just as graceful, the worn wooden spoon carrying just as much significance as the silver-plated ones we used only on holidays. In an old shoe encased in the mud of 3 years' worth of hikes held as much power as the dusty heels sitting in the back of Mother's closet. Heels and silver spoons were fragile. They were weak. Something well-built and sturdy could last for what seemed forever, its ability to withstand destruction a sort of beauty. We were easily mesmerized by the ordinary. We spent long minutes staring at jars of last year's fruit. The way light flowed through the peach preserves, sliding through the sweet juice to rest on the table, was a transformation just as flawless as a moth emerging from the cocoon. Dust in the right light was glitter or confetti. The building of a house was the low beat of a drum calling us out into the fields.
Pepper was a miracle dog for 2 reasons. He survived death and almost survived us. When he was a puppy, his first owner had thrown him out of the window of his car, straight into the path of an older woman's PT Cruiser. She slammed on the brakes, dashed a crumpled Pepper, and swallowed him in her blazer like an oversized baby, then ran back to the Cruiser. She did 80 on the way to Sweet Paws Veterinary Hospital, where they cut him open and stitched him together, wiped his raw spots and wrapped him in bandage, pricked him with needles and pressed gauze to the blood. And finally, they sawed off his 2 hind legs. 4 hours later, the anesthesia wore off, and Pepper's tail began to twitch. If that dog was anything, he was, in my mother's words, a hardy little bastard. When we spotted him at the animal shelter, Pepper was spinning in frantic circles, his hindquarters strapped into a small plastic cart that seemed more suitable for a miniature horse than a dog. Wheels as tall as his blunt hips painted muddy streaks on the floor of the stall, a stub of a tail wriggling above what should have been his legs. My mother immediately ran to the woman at the front desk, an unlit cigarette poised on the curve of her ear. "Can we have a disabled one?" Without a home visit, without the $250 fee, and without the survey deemed mandatory by the poster on the whitewashed wall next to us, he was ours. All my mother had to do was offer the woman a life. By the time I was 11, Pepper had been ours for about 6 months. For us, that was a milestone. We tended to cycle through things in our household rather than work to maintain them. Boyfriends, jobs, kitchen appliances. He was the only one with staying power. On this particular Sunday, it must have been approaching 7 months. "Pepper," I called, seeing if he was in the living room with my mother. He wasn't. I felt my pulse rap against my wrist, like the touch of a forgotten bracelet. "Mom, where's Pepper?" She flopped over the torn arm of the couch, head bobbing back and forth. "What?" "Have you seen Pepper?" I repeated each syllable as slowly as possible, like she was trying to read my lips. She was off that couch like I just told her a cockroach was crawling along her cushion. She pushed me out the door and into the car, threw his leash into the back seat and drove. I looked at the landscape whizzing past us, and something buried in my stomach told me he wasn't there. A cold, sharp part of me I was just beginning to know already had the answer. "Go back," I told her. She didn't listen. "Turn around." I ran up the stairs to her room, the flickering of my heart as I passed Pepper's ramp telling me what I hadn't yet seen. I opened the door and there he was, head peeking out from underneath the fallen sheet of my mother's bed. There was an open bottle of gin, the mouth pointing to his snout like an ominous marker. A puddle of the strong-smelling liquid stretched across the floorboards, and when I picked him up, I could smell it on his small, dry tongue. I buried him behind a dead rose bush in our backyard, the only spot with any trace of beauty. It started raining, but sitting there next to the freshly covered hole I didn't notice, not until a raindrop slipped down my cheek and into my mouth. She came and sat next to me, put an icy hand on my shoulder. "I'm so sorry," she said. I didn't believe her. Some people are just too hard to love.
tugging at the lip of his baby's sling. Really, we need help. I think Mom would have wanted. Thomas missed the end of the sentence because of a particularly loud splash, but thought it was true regardless. She would have wanted so many things. He looked out over the ocean again. "Dad," said his son, and Thomas snapped his attention back. "I'm going to be frank with you." "We need money," interrupted his wife. "We need you to sell the house." Thomas worried the edge of the tablecloth, gestured broadly. "It's a pity that it's all so expensive." "Our point exactly," she said, and leaned forward with a smile that was one part simper. Brandon cried out, and she sprang up to carry her child back to the house, nattering about the dangers of beaches. Thomas just didn't care for her toothpick personality. "We should head back," he said. "I don't think she's coming back to get us." His son nodded his agreement. Father and son grabbed the tablecloth and drew the whole mess together like a rucksack. Thomas squashed it down into the cooler and picked the thing up by both handles. "Should have used the basket," he said. "This'll have to be wiped out inside." "So we should have," said the son, and they headed back to the house together, shouldering the unspoken presence of a woman who had loved them both. When they arrived at the porch, the door was open, screen flapping. His son went into the bedroom to lay the baby down, and Thomas went into the kitchen to drop off the cooler. He stopped. All over the floor were tiny bits of glass, clear and sharp like ice. "I'm so sorry," the wife said, poised on a chair with Brandon on her hip. "I only opened the cupboard and it dove out." Thomas looked at the cupboards that didn't belong to him. He looked down at his hands, holding the cooler. He dropped it there on the floor and left to get shoes. When he came back, breathing slowly, he said nothing. He lifted the mother and child, with no little effort, over the glass and out of the room. It was almost dinner time, and with the kitchen out of commission, the son suggested that they go out. The wife was all for it, but Thomas volunteered to stay. The baby was sleeping anyway, he told them, and he wasn't in the mood for dim lights and noise. When they left, he haunted his own house. He traced the wallpaper, the upholstery, the banister on the porch. He didn't go into the kitchen. He found himself in his living room and wondered at his own intuition. He cupped the old phone to his ear like a shell, letting the static mimic the waves outside, and he leaned against the wall. The cord dangled down to his elbow, lengthened to compensate for children's reach. He traced his name in his wife's address book, hanging on the wall, and he was thankful that this paper, so yellow and old, did not remind him of his wife's skin. Her blue lettering, curling and falling, reminded him of the grace of her hands, but not of her eyes. The way she used to lean against this wall was gone, though he remembered that her shoulder was right about level with the numbered keys. He pushed down the bit of plastic that disconnected his call and wondered why he didn't know what it was called. If he was to be any representative of times gone by, he should at least be able to name things that were different. When he dialed the number the first time, he hung up after the last digit. The second time, he let it ring once, and then he remembered the feel of the ocean on his feet. The third time, he only pressed redial, and as it was ringing, he could feel himself leaving. He could feel his wife touching his shoulder, his grandchildren's steps shaking the porch. He closed his eyes and lifted his chin as though this would aid his ascension. Thomas considered and wondered why she always drew the right thing out of him, like a thread connected to a ball of yarn, like tug-of-war. He could feel himself curling towards her, a plant toward the light, and he knew that it was more than the living room, and bigger than the house, and wider than the ocean and the beach houses and the sand. The ringing seemed to go on forever, echoing. "The house," he said faintly, when somebody answered. "You can have it."
I'm Deshaun, and I decided I wanted to be a writer in 3rd grade. I was a huge fan of the show Justice League that came on Cartoon Network, but when the series finale aired, I hated it and rewrote it and introduced it to my class, who loved it. Thank you, YoungArts, for this amazing opportunity. Thank you for this once-in-a-lifetime experience, and thank you all of you who work with the program, who have been doing it for so long, and I hope you continue to help kids like me achieve their dreams and follow their art.
All that research I did, reading and rereading articles from different scientific journals, watching the same episode of Through the Wormhole with Morgan Freeman 6 times, Googling general relativity and the Schwarzschild radius and primordial black holes and black hole thermodynamics, and for what? Just so I can tell you something you likely won't consider profound or new or even relevant to the things you care about, the things normal people care about. Here it is. Black holes rip stars from our universe that have been around for billions of years as if they never belonged and swallow them. Black holes devour. Like I said, you may not care, but I do. I don't have a choice, so don't hold that against me. Don't turn around and carry on the conversation with someone else. Joan Didion wrote that writing is the act of saying I, of imposing oneself upon other people, of saying, listen to me, see it my way, change your mind. And that's what I need right now. For you to sit somewhere that's quiet and dedicate yourself to flipping a couple of pages and wasting some minutes of your day, listening to me ramble about the things I've lost and can't get a hold of. My brothers, my sister, as if they are the stars that get too close to a black hole and before you know it, are drawn into its gravitational pull and disappear and never return. My brother Quinte died 3 minutes after his birth. This was the first disappearance, the first gravitational death. I was 5 years old. I don't remember the day my mother went into labor. I wasn't in the room or even at the hospital when it happened. Someone took a picture of my mother holding Quinte for the first time, only minutes after his newborn heart stopped beating, when doctors failed to bring him back and scrambled to figure out what went wrong. My mother showed me the photo a year ago. "You've seen this before," she said. I shook my head no. The memory was gone. Later, I asked if I attended Quinte's funeral, and she assured me I did. I wore black just like everyone else. I said goodbye. Black holes devoured. 2 years after Quinte's death, my mother had more children. First my sister Genevia, then my brother Titus. On school days, I completed all my assignments while I rode the bus home. So when I got there, I could take Genevia and Titus from her and let her rest. Most days, I carried Titus in my arms while following Genevia as she crawled or walked through the house. I wanted to make sure she stayed out of trouble. For the most part, she did. I wish I could say the same about our mother, but there were robberies. Guns and masks, just like the movies, worn by the sort of people you hear about while watching 48 Hours or America's Most Wanted. My mom was one of those people, and she drove the getaway car. She got caught. The night she and sobbed, she called me back into the living room, wiped her own eyes, so she could tell me to stop crying because everything would be all right, and ask who I would want to live with while she served her time. I didn't have anyone particular in mind, nor did I care a whole lot about who it turned out to be.
just as long as Genevia, Titus, and I remain together. I haven't seen Genevia and Titus in almost 6 years. Black holes devour.
So your boyfriend sweats a lot. A guide to conquering young love. If his birthday happens to fall only 3 weeks after your first date, don't rely on instinct when it comes to shopping for a gift. You'll be much better off just making him a mixtape. Start with songs that you think he might like, and then begin to incorporate tracks that he simply must hear, such as All She Needs, What a Girl Wants, and Treat Her Right. You won't know him well enough to buy him something that he'll actually use, so it's best to go with something personal. But that doesn't mean you should drive to Barnes & Noble and buy him a book of cat haikus when he says he's an animal lover. He'll unwrap it and smile like it's the greatest thing he's ever received, but when he opens it to a random page and reads the words out loud, you'll feel like a complete idiot. Smokey is eating all of our plants. Somebody fetch the spray bottle. Try to make the holidays as special as possible. By the time Christmas rolls around, you'll be able to overlook all of the little flaws and downfalls that you've encountered and just focus on growing closer. Sure, it sounds cheesy when you hear it now, but as you sit in front of his living room fireplace, rearranging presents below the Christmas tree while he tries to teach himself how to work the new single-serving coffee maker so he can brew you a hazelnut cappuccino, you'll swear you've never been happier. When it comes to buying Christmas presents, you don't have to worry the way you do on birthdays. Buy him something that you think is cute or funny or somehow reminiscent of your relationship and just let it go. Act surprised when he pulls a long velvet box out of his back pocket, smiling as if to say, "Damn girl, you scored on this one." He's only afraid you won't like the necklace. Let him hook it behind your neck and make sure you don't take it off until you get home later that evening. When he gives you your second gift, he'll blush and say that it was spur of the moment. Hope for the best and expect the worst. If it turns out to be a book on astrology, let him pull it from your hands so he can read the description below your birth date. The individual whose birthday falls within the realm of Aries is blessed with a magnetic personality and tons of charm and sex appeal. He'll kiss you on the cheek. But relationships are what matter most, and you rarely lack for romance in your life. Does that sound right to you? He'll say, grinning. Even if you've got the charm and sex appeal of a 12-year-old Amish boy slinging cow manure off the side of a dirt road, just play along. Clearly, he doesn't think so. Take his hand, squeeze it gently, but not too gently. Let him know how good it feels to have his arms around your waist, to hear a song on the radio, and immediately trace your thoughts back to him. Tell him that it feels good to not be so lonely, that you appreciate the way he looks at you, the way he makes an effort to hide the teriyaki stain on the passenger seat of his car whenever you're around, and the way he tries to help you understand computer programming. At a later point in your relationship, you might begin to notice things that weren't immediately apparent. When you kiss, he may use far too much tongue. He might gurgle or groan when he eats. And as springtime approaches and he begins to pack his sweaters away in the back of the garage, you might discover that he's got a remarkably large collection of novelty t-shirts bearing slogans such as, "Without geometry, life is pointless," and "A shotgun wedding is a case of wife or death." Case in point, you're going to want out.
Hi, my name's Emily Nason, and I'm from Greenville, South Carolina. I became a writer so I can make a difference in other young writers' lives like many writers have made in mine. This week at YoungArts, I did something I've never done before, even though I live in South Carolina. I sunbathed in January.
Market Street. As a child, my mother and grandmother took me to buy sweetgrass baskets propped on card tables near the corner of streets people knew to meet on. Sat me down in front of a woman weaving palmetto leaves and pine needles, singing an old gullah song that sounded more familiar than it should have. Basket weavers, they use a spoon. Keep it tucked under the linen of their blouses, a filed down needle made from the handle, passed down from the picking generations to the takers. It helps with the threading of grass and art and women. My grandmother's kitchen has always been filled with baskets. Even in those days at the parsonage, when she'd drink an old-fashioned from a mason jar and wait for my mother to return with a switch picked from the empty lot next door. I wonder if she ever emptied out the family silver onto the scratched dining room table, pushing aside the knives and forks, curious to see if one of those spoons held everything together. Look, I've made up everything I've ever written about these women. The way my mother presses an aloe leaf to a burn, the way my grandmother deveins shrimp, the way they write letters. Maybe if we had a spoon, it would be different, because it seems as if that piece of silver could pass down everything, and I wouldn't have to make up memories for the sake of remembering. But we do have baskets and that feeling as we stand in front of this woman, each of us clueless as to where we've heard this old gullah song before. Home. I once saw a boy clutch the loop of a noose and wait for his father to hoist him up high into the branches of a pecan tree. Those limbs, almost human in their guilt, looked like they'd break under the boy's weight. And it reminded me of girls I knew who self-medicated with oleander blooms, reminding me of acts of punishment and faith that seem interchangeable. My grandmother has Alzheimer's. She thinks my name is Laura. We don't correct her. Just sit and try to convince her that she's in a hospital bed, not in the twin bed at her parents' house. I wonder how my mother would feel if she knew I cry in the shower once a week. Slap the tiles with my flattened palms, try to pull the shower curtain down on top of me, etch Donald Hall's poems on the walls with a bar of Dial soap. It's that fear of my mother realizing she never needed me to begin with, reverting to a time before me, leaving me no choice but to tattoo "I love you" in her own handwriting across the artery that keeps me alive. So I can say, look, see, you loved me, you did. I'm woven with these women, they're woven into me. And there's faith in that, and foolishness and punishment. There's all of that because when you watch someone destroy the basket they weaved for you, weaved with you, there's not much left to do but watch and wait.
One, I was a problem child in 5th grade. It was the year my parents split up, and the year I stopped talking when I wasn't answering someone. My mother brought me to a psychologist who wore glasses on her neck and had games like Parcheesi and Trouble stacked in her office. She had a high-pitched voice when she talked to me, and a deeper voice when she talked with my parents. I hated her. I hated that she took my parents into her office for private conversations, and I hated that she told me, in a mechanical voice, it wasn't possible for my parents to get back together. My dad took me out for ice cream at Dairy Queen on the weekends. I thought ice cream was annoying, so I always ordered a small box of French fries. My dad brought Kelly once, but I didn't talk the entire time, so he never brought her again. He tried to convince me that divorce could be fun. I would get 2 houses, and I would never get bored of living at one place because I could just go to the other. It would almost be like having two moms, too. When he said this, I shut up for the rest of the night. My friends didn't understand what was going on. I think they just thought I was angry all the time. I was. That was the year I began being angry. I wasn't angry when I was at the barn, though. In the summer, when I didn't say a word during an entire 2-hour lesson, Gary made me dismount, and he talked to me for a long time on the porch. "It ain't your fault, Elisa," he said. And although I was accustomed to discarding that statement, on that particular day, I tried to believe it. 2. When Dr. Evans told me that if I had fallen in even a slightly different position, I would have died, I laughed. My mother stood up and kicked her chair. Dr. Evans ran his fingers through his gray hair and yawned. He said, "You know the procedure. I'll send a tech to fit you with your neck brace. I'll give you a heavier dose of painkillers this time. You'll be able to ride again in 6 to 8 months." My mother left the room and slammed the door. Gary didn't answer my calls. I had stopped writing him a month before, but I decided to try one last time. I would appeal to him with humor. A week after I broke my neck, I wrote, "You were right about writing English. Here you thought it was bad I broke my leg every time that I fell writing Western. I was just jumping, and guess what? I broke my neck." Dr. Evans said I almost died. Do you remember him? Maybe I had the wrong address.
Hi, I'm Charles. The reason I became a writer is because it's the only thing I do that doesn't feel like a waste of time. I'd like to send a big thank you to YoungArts for this amazing opportunity. I'm absolutely staggered.
Ingrid Harris first caught the public's attention in August 1991 with a series of paintings based on the rape of Persephone. In most of these paintings, she portrayed the debased goddess with her own face. When pressed for the series' inspiration, Harris responded that when she was 14, a classmate had followed her home from her middle school, forced his way inside her house, and raped her at knife point. "I'm cautious of making any big statements about pain and art," she told Troubadour, a small New Orleans-based arts magazine, in 1994. "I was raped, so I paint rape. It's simple catharsis." I hadn't heard of Ingrid when I wandered into her gallery one windy afternoon in December 1998. The exhibit space she rented catered mainly to fluffy local artists whose idea of social commentary was a silkscreen of Monica Lewinsky's stained dress. I left work that day feeling numb, exhausted. I stepped through Ingrid's door in search of pleasant diversion. Instead, I saw into my soul. Critics liken Ingrid's later work to Frida Kahlo and Edward Hopper, but there is something undeniably organic in her bleak imagery, a voyeuristic intensity in which the artist's life and the viewer's seem to be fused on the canvas. In the same way that reading Revolutionary Road as a teenager made me feel that my parents' marriage had been spied on and recorded, standing before Harris's work laid me bare. I felt that this woman I had never met must know everything about me. My own rape occurred during my junior year at the University of New Orleans. A boy from my art history class asked me to ride with him to a gas station for a case of beer. I'd recently turned 21 and was much in demand as a supplier of alcohol. Rather than one of the 24-hour gas stations, he drove me to the back of a Texaco that had closed hours before. He then turned off the engine, raped me, and opened the passenger side door for me to get out. I pulled on my clothes, stepped onto the curb, and watched him drive away. Then I walked the 10 blocks back to my friend's apartment and persuaded her to take me home. I never reported my rapist to the police. Having kept silent through the remainder of college and feeling increasingly isolated and depressed, I applied for a job at Our Lady of Intercession, a rape crisis center based in a derelict office building just outside the French Quarter. The director put me in charge of the phones. I shared an office with Susan, a quiet 30-something, who on my second day told me that she had been a victim of the Hitchcock rapist, a now convicted serial attacker who targeted young, attractive blondes. Susan and I took calls from all over New Orleans. Some callers requested information or offered to make donations. Some were rape survivors who couldn't sleep and needed someone to talk to. Some had been raped only minutes previous and confessed the desire to kill themselves. A few were men.
I live everywhere. I sleep on street corners. I chase the dark ammonia of piss through smog, drink from paper bags to the sound of drowning sirens, crumble myself to sleep in the weave of a regulation jacket. I know people, but I know them like I know my own dreams. Like I've seen them once before, but the circumstances escape me. They're shadow puppets, dancing rough against calfskin for the few gutted seconds between sunrise and sunset. For a man with no 9 to 5, I still feel each second ticking away against my palate. I wake up at the same time every day, still dark, and I shoot up. I keep my eyes closed the whole day, and I feel the air as people twist by me. The bells toll, 5 lone shudders and a slice of hymn. My ears start ringing again. My head goes dizzy at the moaning, the screaming from the public restrooms. They look like confession booths for some grim and distant future. Green on the outside, grimy white on the inside, and locked with rusted iron. Inside, a hooker and her John, and they're elongating like fat cats in the crisp morning air. But for that one moment, they are happier than the world allows. When I first came here, I tried a girl out too. It was the first thing I did, loose as I was, from the cable-tie cuffs of truth, of justice, the American way. She was maybe 14, and a year from being pretty. Her eyelids were heavy and lowered like a baby doll's, and she nearly wet herself, nearly shit herself. She cried for mama from the dense pits of her belly when I got to really shaking her around. When she went down on me, I could see the seam stretch where her soft lips joined her wide mouth, joined me. And I thought she'd break like so much china. I panicked when she finished. I zipped up fast, scraped the alley with my eyes. But her smile was all canines, and she told me not to worry. She knew what the cops here liked. After she left, after no pretenses, she slipped between the vertebrae of street lights and stop signs to someone else's cigarette burns. She was a beauty, a rhapsody of broken bones, a sweet-tongued savior, and I watched her right turn, bare-heeled into the night. On my neck, the wet nausea of post-release, post-regret.
My name is Danny Rothschild. I'm a writing finalist, and I'm a writer because the modeling agencies wouldn't take me. But in all honesty, I'm a writer because I move around every couple of years, and writing is the only constant thing I have to hold on to in my life. In Nigeria, at 11 years old, I gained my independence, though I didn't necessarily see that as a good thing. I lived in transit, spent more time moving from house to house than in a house itself. When we first moved to Abuja, we lived in a life camp, 15 or 20 houses scattered around, each with a separate fence and bars on the windows, 6 watchmen roaming around at night, and barbed wire on an 8-foot wall surrounding us. My father worked for the Millennium Project, a program based on accomplishing 8 different goals in 12 villages scattered throughout Africa by the year 2015. He worked with the village of Pampaida, but we lived several hours south where I attended school. Only a week after we moved, the head supervisor of the project passed away, and my father took his place. For the first time in 20 years, my parents would live away from each other, and neither of them were happy about it. At first, my dad drove down on the weekends, but soon after that contracted malaria, and so my mother decided to stay with him until he felt better. In 10 days, his health returned, but my mother never did. I moved in with the neighbors, an old couple from New Zealand, and they were wonderful to me. I had my own room, the guest room, but it was just that, constantly feeling like a guest. The feeling didn't change visiting my parents in their village. On the weekends, I took a bus to see them, but due to the unpaved roads and the rusty vehicle, the drive took 9 hours. The constancy of the trip became more familiar than sleeping on the couch in my parents' home, more familiar than the flower bus. Fatima was her name. The same woman cooked fries on the side of the road, the same boy with the same goats, the same pregnant woman traveling back to her family after a long week, the same potholes in the same road. Soon, I didn't need Fatima to tell me when to hold on to my seat. I knew the path by heart because of the closest thing I had to home. The bus ride started becoming a habit, but during the elections, things got serious. They canceled school every other day because of bomb threats, and the neighbors I stayed with left, decided it was too dangerous after seeing one man stab another to death on a Thursday. I felt safe. We had barbed wire on the 8-foot wall, guards at night, bars on the window, but that's why they left, because of the guards, the bars, and the 8-foot wall. The last 4 weeks were spent in my parents' village, their village, not mine. The house belonged to them, and I was a guest, again, sleeping on their couch. At night, I would sit outside, wait for the broken headlights of the bus to shine their dim light on the road. I always waved to Fatima, and she always waved back, but only for a minute, and then home would drive away.
On the hottest day of July, 5 minutes after the stroke of noon, Mrs. Valentina Felcher was looking out at the boiling Hudson from her apartment on 157 and Riverside Drive. On the windowsill, her breasts spilling from her like fat milk bags, Mrs. Felcher rested, head stretched out, double chin cupped in the palm of her hand. Her hair was in pink and blue curlers, wound up tight to reveal the tension at her temples. Her face was a composition in age. Her eyeballs were sunken deep in their sockets, eyelids sleeping on top. She opened her eyes wide only when she inhaled from her cigarette, gray irises suddenly exposed. Seconds later, 2 luxurious clouds of smoke emerged from her nostrils, then vanished into the heavy air. Mrs. Felcher's mouth was the red of lust, a lipstick that she purchased for $1.99 at the pharmacy. It was layered on thickly like jam. Hers were proud lips, true lips that uttered words with expression, with passion, for goodness sake. Her hair now was black with wet, but once dry, it reverted to silver, and she wore it in peasant braids. Her knuckles on the windowsill shone like freshly polished doorknobs. Her closet overflowed with eccentric items, embroidered corsets, black satin jackets, detachable Shakespearean collars, and clip-on earrings with pink pearls. But Mrs. Felcher preferred, to be perfectly frank, to wear nothing at all. Her cleavage melting on the wooden frame of the sill, Mrs. Felcher was certainly bearing everything, not naked, if you will, but nude, natural. In the heat of the city, her body was a shrine of glistening sweat. In the folds of her chest there dangled bum Swarovski diamonds. The rolls of fat on her stomach collected, one on top of the other, like stackable monks kneeling toward light. Her ankles were pale rings of flesh, and on her feet were tall turquoise heels that just managed to uphold her glorious mass. Resting on the sill, she formed an R, a half arc, and the smoke slowly trickled from the tip of her cigarette. Well, another day in New York, Mrs. Felcher squawked to the limp air. She stubbed her cigarette on her heel, then tossed it out the window. It landed on Mr. Chester, her downstairs neighbor, an elderly man who owned the local grocery store and charged her extra for lemons on Mondays. He was used to ash settling on his head, but yelled, "Mrs. Felcher, how many times do I have to tell you not to throw your damn cigarettes?" "Only a million, you silly man," she replied, looking down at him. At that angle, the sky could be seen through the holes in her pink curlers. "Mrs. Felcher, I will ask you one more time and then I'm calling the cops." He waved his little old man fist. "Just don't throw your puss at me, Chewy," said Mrs. Felcher before shutting the window. She could hear Mr. Chester's muffled cursing through the glass. He did not take well to insults directed at his overweight Siamese cat.
Alabama. I can still remember that barn, the cow with an old maid's eyes, the Appaloosa who taught me to ride down by the riverbank. That night, you led me up the wooden ladder to the hayloft, pushing aside thick bales, telling me to come here close, no closer. On the floor, nestled in your high school football jersey, were those 3 baby swallows, looking at you the way I did when you caught that winning pass on the 5-yard line, 15 feet to hometown heroics. You took crumpled cornbread from your pocket, and they let you put it there, right there, next to their honey chests and sinewy feet. When we left, you looked over your shoulder. And weeks later, on the porch swing at dusk, I saw your shadow climb the sycamore tree, black against the forgiving dusk of summer. You set down the cigar box, lifted the top, and did nothing else but let them hop to the edge of the branches and fly into twilight. And if you asked me now, I'd swear that you'd like to see me sitting there in Sunday paisley, wearing your grandmother's cameo brooch. I wish I had not thought of the softness of your voice when that last cow wandered into the shed, when you went home that night without running the last 5 yards. Knots. The mechanics of a noose, he said, are simple as a kiss. His fingers loosened pressure points on my neck, leaving harmonic scales trickling down my spine.
He told me each coil of rope adds friction. The harder you pull, the tighter it goes. Hands tacky with sweat, he twisted fibers, molding them, forcing them together. I can see those fingers tying sailing knots, fisherman's knots, blood knots. I have one sneaker I can't untie, a reef or a figure eight, I can't remember which. He steers the stolen skiff, creating waves where they shouldn't be, cutting a wake in someone else's water. I imagine pushing his back, his limbs dropping heavy into brine. That night we sleep on the wharf, and I'm waking to find him outlining my body with rope, tracing my shoulders, the curve of my hips. It's simpler, he says, much simpler than you think.
I threw myself into childhood, but eventually I had to get older, and that process started with a boy. He was my overly earnest lab partner, a year older and nearly as intelligent. He wasn't particularly good-looking or popular, but he was nice to me, and I fell in love. Mama picked me up from school the day I realized it, and she knew immediately that something was different. "Ma belle," she said, giving me that all-knowing look of hers, "what has happened to you?" "There's a boy." I put my feet up on the dashboard. She swatted at my shins, and I brought them down again. "His name is Eric. I think he likes me." "Ooh," she said. We pulled out of the school parking lot. "Your first boy." She didn't say crush. Mama was too sophisticated for such a silly word. I didn't know what else to tell her, what she'd want to know, and so I fell silent. She drove us home, one hand on the steering wheel and the other hanging out the window, letting a trail of cigarette smoke drift onto the suburban streets. She pulled into the driveway, parked the car under the oak tree, and tossed her cigarette. She ground it into the cement with the toe of her high-heeled shoe. "Come, ma belle," she said, opening the passenger side door for me. I followed her into our living room where she mixed a drink and settled into an overstuffed armchair, running a hand down her skirt, starting at her hip, smoothing the material along her thigh. I sat across from her on the sofa, my legs folded under me, a nail file in hand. I didn't use it, just rolled it between my fingers as I watched her. "Now that you have that boy," Mama said, "perhaps we should color your hair." My hair? I reached up and lifted a piece of it, examining it in the soft living room light. Dyeing it would improve the dull color, but not much could be done for its straightness. It hung flush against my head, brushing my shoulders without so much as a flip at the end. Mama had tried to perm it once when I was 5, but the curls had unwound after less than a week. "We can't color it blonde," she continued, taking a sip of her brandy. "Having us match would be too cute. Matching is awful, ma belle. Never allow yourself to match anyone, not even your mama. Perhaps a nice red." I raised my eyebrows. "We're not dyeing my hair red." She waved a hand. "Oh, sorry. Oh, not that terrible carrot color. A darker shade, maybe auburn." "I don't want to dye my hair," I protested. She waved a hand. "Oh, you are so young, a bebe. You don't understand. It's not for you. No woman dyes her hair for herself. It is for your little man, no?" "Eric isn't little," I snapped. "He's 15. "No matter, ma belle." She took a long sip of her brandy. "However big or small he is, he will appreciate you more if your hair is less bland." "I can attract boys without beautiful hair," I said. She paused halfway through a sip of her brandy and lowered the glass, her hand steady. I avoided her eyes, running the pad of my index finger along the length of the nail file. For a long time, the only sounds in the living room were the whirling fan and the clinking of the ice against her glass. Finally, she stood. "That's fine, Tilly," and it was the first time in my life I could remember her calling me by my given name.
Remember, baby, that's the only advice I can give you that I know you may try to listen to. You won't study in school. You'll have so much potential that you can feel it bursting out of your hands and heart, but you will stop trying to achieve anything in 2 or 3 years when you realize there are people better, smarter than you, and there always will be. You will eat too much, and you will hate yourself for it for a very, very long time. But the hatred, and your mother's hatred, and your school friends' hatred will all manifest in a hunger. And you will go on your first diet when you are 9, and you will go on your last diet when you are 16. And during those years, you will cry, and break mirrors, and hurt yourself, and everyone will encourage it because you're fat and ugly, and you love so much, and you deserve it, you deserve it. You deserve to die and be alone, and wear hideous clothes, and sit in specific ways to hide your double chin, and always set your purse down over your stomach, but then you will look at other beautiful fat women, and you will proclaim that harsh punch of a word, and you will be fat, and you will love yourself, and you will start getting angry at the stores for not making your size, instead of getting angry at your stomach for bulging so beautifully over the tops of the skirts of Old Navy. You will write, but mostly you will intend to write and then find something else to do. You will fall in love. You will fall in love with women. You will fall in love with everyone and everything, the whole world. And even after it breaks your heart, you will keep on loving it. And you have to remember, baby, please. Just try to remember how much you love it. You're so stupid. You're so amazing and perfect and stupid. And I promise that you'll grow up so sad, every breath making you hurt, and every night you'll cry and hate how scared you are to die, but how mortified you are to live. And your father will be poisoned by cancer and morph into a quiet and terrible monster that you will spend years learning to avoid. And he'll drink, and he'll find religion, and he'll grab you by the hair, and he'll throw you over the couch onto the floor. And you'll always know it was your fault, because really it was your fault. And the policeman will ask if he's ever done anything like that before, and you'll shake and cry and say that he used to tell you stories about cowboys and secret agents. And you'll say you want him back, you want him back. And your sister will run away, and you won't see her for hours. And Dad will go away for months. And when he comes back, you're not sure if you want him there again. But he's more of the man who played guitar and swapped pieces of your steak for his tomatoes, and everything will calm down and fall into peace, and he won't scare you anymore. I must be scaring you. You're so young. You haven't done anything stupid yet, but everything will change. Not soon, but gradually, as things have to. I just want you to remember, baby, because you'll never believe in an afterlife or a God, and this will be the only chance you'll get to walk and move and get so incredibly hurt and never recover from it, but love even harder because of it. Take every memory like you take a firefly out of the thick summer air. Pull it to your chest and just keep it there. Let it crawl into the front pocket of your overalls. File it away for when you need reminding. Don't worry. Not because there's nothing to worry about, but because there's no point to it. Remember, and always write, even when you hate it, even when you haven't for weeks, even when you could go the rest of your life without writing another word, because everything you've ever thought or said or written has been done before and better. You're mediocre at best, and that's all you'll ever be. Write anyway. You have to. It's the only way to remember anything. I love you, mostly.
you